Hi, this is Dark Journalist. Today I'm excited to welcome back former Assistant Housing Secretary and the publisher of the Solari Report, Catherine Austin Fitts. Now, Catherine's in-depth reports have some of the most cutting-edge and innovative analysis behind them, and her latest one may be the most powerful yet. It's all about global investment in space. In it, she not only outlines the technical advances that are taking place to speed up the process of our becoming an interplanetary civilization, but she also exposes the invisible hand of black budget investment in the new frontier of outer space. Now, Catherine sees a covert agenda driving a sometimes lethal secrecy policy in relation to UFO technology, space weapons, and the elite colonization of selected planets. In her view, we've been in a deep hole of disinformation since NASA was formed and JFK was assassinated at the start of the space era. Can we get to the real truth in the 21st century under the auspices of the controlled media? Here we go. Former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts, the UFO Economy 3.0, the Black Budget rockets into space.
As the secrecy grows, it's like it keeps sucking in more and more. I think our entire economy is a space-based economy because when you have to produce that much money in secret, everything organizes around that fact. You know, part of the problem is that so far in history, two of the most profitable endeavors in the world are warfare and slavery.
You know, when we think of the kind of covert operations that we've witnessed on planet Earth over the past 50 years, it's interesting to consider just how much of it was for the benefit of a secret space program, and to cope with challenges emanating from space that we've never been told about. Does the existence of a UFO economy explain the elaborate secrecy that we've witnessed, which was set up to deal with the potential threat or interference of an off-world culture? We have too many data points that don't add up. From the huge decimation of NASA's budget to pre-lunar levels, to the virtual disappearance of the space program from the public mind over the course of decades. Now a new version of space is being pushed, from Super Bowl commercials touting a space future, space tourism, and even colonies on Mars. Has our public effort with regards to space been transferred to private hands with the help of the black budget and the deep state? Let's go ask Catherine Austin Fitts.
Dark Journalist will go there. The deepest issues, the hardest stories, the biggest secrets. The truth is never easy. With top guests, like former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts.
Catherine, who is really behind this media censorship?
Internet feeds go through satellites. Who controls the satellites? It's the Pentagon.
Legendary investigator Graham Hancock.
Graham, this cataclysm must have destroyed an advanced culture in our ancient past.
It truly was an extinction-level event. It was accompanied by massive animal extinctions. It was accompanied by huge and unexplained sea level rises, and then a sudden plunge of global temperatures.
Best-selling author Jim Marrs.
Jim, don't these elite corporate owners need us around to buy their GMO food? Why would they want to depopulate?
Because they are eugenicists and they believe that they need to purify the human race. And if that sounds like the Nazis, that's exactly what it is.
Coast to Coast AM investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe.
Linda, how are we going to scale that wall of UFO secrecy?
Humans themselves are bypassing, are beginning to dismiss all of the policies of denial and lies.
Dark Journalist will go there. Visit darkjournalist.com and subscribe now for a special winter discount available for just $39 for 1 full year. You'll not only receive access to the complete audio archives to stream or download at your convenience, you'll also get exclusive subscriber-only content and Dark Journalist event discounts. Sign up for our free newsletter to stay updated on the latest shows. Dark Journalist. Let's get the real story in 2016.
You know, we need dark journalists, so just keep doing what you're doing.
Catherine, it's great to have you back on the show. I want to say first off that this new report is, I think, your best one ever. And it's got just such brilliant analysis in there of black budget and geopolitical forces And it also has a lot of sound strategic investing information as well regarding space. There's a real vision of the future in this wrap-up, and I also found it fascinating that you went with space as the theme. Now, can you give us some idea of what was driving your focus?
Well, as you know, for many decades now, I've been trying to figure out where so much money in the global economy and in our domestic economy is disappearing to. So we literally have a very big part of the balance sheet globally and domestically, which is invisible.
Uh-huh.
And we've been investing money for years. And I've been trying to figure out where the money's going and why. And I finally come to a conclusion that really the defining driver in the US economy since 1947 has been space. And we literally now have the whole economy organized around producing the resources to go into space. At the same time, that investment in the form of the orbital platform is increasingly used to control what's going on in Earth. We have a lot of the invasive systems coming down from the orbital platform. But finally, on the overt side, we're starting to say, yes, we're going into space. And so I was just looking at a recent speech by the head of NASA. He referred to Earth as our home planet. And clearly we're bringing in a lot more private companies. We have a lot more entrepreneurial activity going in. But I also think that part of this movement into space is we're transferring out of the black budget technology that will help us build the industrial base to really expand productivity that will support us going into space. So whether it's trying to understand what's been happening since 1947 and where all this money has been disappearing to, we're trying to understand the role of what's going on in the sky around us in terms of satellites, and soon to be this year, Daniel drones. It's something we should talk about. And then what's going on in terms of space exploration, space tourism, space mining, all the different aspects I wanted to bring into an integrated picture. And for me, the most important question I asked was, and I've been asking for many years, why did we proceed with the rebalancing of the global economy in the mid-90s in a way that was so aggressive? You proceeded in a way that was going to cause enormous and very fast change and a lot of opportunity, but a lot of heartache all around the globe. And you and I have talked about it. My question was, why did we do it? Did we do it because the technology and the orbital platform would support us doing it, or did we do it for another reason? And finally, after many, many years of looking at what we're doing in space and, whether overt or covert, I came back and realized, no, I think the reason that we rebalanced the global economy is we decided that it was very important that we proceed to become a multi-planetary civilization and do it as quickly as possible. Now, that raises the question, why? But it's clear to me that what we're in the process of doing is creating major global capacity for space programs and space exploration. And we are clearly on the way to building a multi-planetary civilization. Some people, as you know, say we have one. I don't know whether or not you saw the Boeing ad at the Super Bowl.
Yes, that was so interesting. Tell us about it.
Okay, I have it up on the website. It's called Just You Wait. It's 30 seconds long. It shows Boeing's vision of what our world will be like in 2116, 100 years from now.
Right.
It has space elevators. It has colony on Mars. It has planes flying around the world in an hour. It has all of our energy being delivered from solar platforms in the sky. It's that picture I always show I showed it in Secret Space Program and in the wrap-up of the solar plant in the orbital platform delivering energy to Earth that the Japanese are working on.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all real. But if you think my wrap-up was far out, it didn't begin to, I thought, oh my God, did Boeing get that from the wrap? It was quite amazing. So now, the Super Bowl is the defining, if you want to put a picture up in front of American men, that's the number one space where you do it. So for Boeing to show this vision of the future, they're basically saying, in 2116, we're going to be a multiplanetary civilization. That's where this is going. And your energy is essentially going to be free other than the distribution costs of coming in from space.
Fascinating.
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, they're putting the message out there.
Right.
That's an intriguing thing about Boeing, is they advertise a lot in the domestic space. So if you watch news shows, there's always a Boeing ad, even though the average consumer will never want an Uzi, for example. But they need to keep that PR going out there. Still, you have to wonder why the expensive ads. It almost looks like a payoff to stations for being good.
Here's why they're doing it. And all the big defense contractors do it. If you look at how much money they're making from the U.S. taxpayer, it's enormous. And so they always make an effort to protect their brand with the general population. Now, Boeing, because a lot of people fly Boeing planes for commercial flight, Boeing has a reason for the general population. They're basically marketing to their customer's customer, whether it's the U.S. government or the airlines. And so they have a reason to build their brand broadly in that sense.
Yeah, they have to keep that smokescreen going.
Of course, we know, because Northrop also had a very interesting ad that looked like one of the secret space program ads. It was very interesting. But we know that both Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman have come out and said that they have or will shortly have nuclear fusion. And, how they're going to market that. Are they going to market wholesale, retail? We don't know. But it is theoretically possible that they could be, marketing in a much more retail sense.
So interesting. Between that and the Black Knight satellite UFO ad that Pepsi did, I really think these companies are now trying to tell us something.
Right.
I do want to mention here that this Solari wrap-up report on space, so everyone here knows exactly what it is, this is 106 pages of in-depth reporting on every aspect of the space economy. There's hardcore analysis of the UFO economy aspects that really pulls no punches. And it's a real achievement. It seemed to me in reading it that you wanted to make it more accessible than ever.
What I feel, Daniel, is that most of our subscribers are very, very busy. And they're overwhelmed by media. And what they need, what we try and do is do an annual wrap-up and then 3 quarterly wrap-ups. So for a year, 1 every quarter. And if that's the only thing you can read every year is those 4 wrap-ups every year, you will be unbelievably knowledgeable about what's going on. So we're trying to, take the lemon and squeeze out all the juice so that your time doesn't get wasted by the noise and you see the deeper picture. And in each wrap-up, what we do is we focus on one theme where we go very, very deep on one topic, which we think is essential if you're going to understand the global economy and how it relates to your investments or your assets or your job. Whatever your participation is in the economy, the goal is to help you build a map that helps you navigate. And a lot of the impetus for the wrap-ups came from my frustration watching and experiencing my subscribers getting fooled by various media.
Oh, so, yeah.
I'm always trying to figure out how to give them a coherent, clear, deeper map so that they don't get tricked.
Well, the wrap-ups are so popular, and this one is definitely the best, I think. And I've been reading them since they started. So it's so good, and even though we can't cover all of it, I'm going to focus in on some really insightful highlights here. First, you have this amazing timeline in there, and I thought we could use that timeline actually as a framework for going deeper on some of these key aspects. I also threw a couple in here so we can talk about them.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, when I started to write it, and I was writing about the space-based economy and what was sort of going on and how it related to the general economy. And then I realized, a lot of us, because this is what happened to me, need to step back and learn the terminology and revisit what the history has been officially. So that's why I ended up putting in a sort of the space-based ecosystem is what I called it. And then the map.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's great information, and it gives you the dates and the history. And when you see that, it's almost like a rhythm starts to develop so that by the time you get to the end and where we are now, you can see a major crossroads is happening. So I'm going to go through some of these dates and we'll have you discuss their major significance.
Okay.
So let's start with this one. Fascinating. 1947, the National Security Act is born, and with it come covert funding and the Black Budget. 1962, JFK calls for a manned mission to the moon, but he also asks the CIA to share information on high-risk UFO cases, and he's assassinated shortly after that in 1963.
Right.
1983, President Reagan announces the SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative Program, or Star Wars, as it's often called. This idea to weaponize space to make the world safer somehow always had some elements to it that were completely under the radar, as we'll see. Reagan, it has now been confirmed by former Soviet leader Gorbachev, pulled him aside during one of their summit meetings and said, "Will you help us if we're attacked by a UFO threat out there?" And I have a clip of that here. Gorbachev with Charlie Rose at a recent event. Let's watch this.
President Reagan suddenly said to me, "What would you do if the United States were attacked by someone from outer space? Would you help us?" I said, "No doubt about it." He said, "We too."
Some startling testimony there that gives us a glimpse of what SDI may have been all about, handling a threat from out there rather than one down here. Now, I don't know if you caught the death stare coming from Henry Kissinger there, but he was obviously terrified Gorbachev was going to give the whole game away. That was very interesting, and it reminded me of something from your work, where you've always tied these shenanigans from Iran-Contra into the SDI Star Wars program, because, we're in 1985, and suddenly the black budget fraud goes off the charts right as those two things are happening.
Right.
So there's a few more steps there in your space chronology, but for time's sake, I'll bring us right up to last November. We have the Off-Planet Mining Bill, the Space Act, H.R. 2262. It was passed on November 10th, 2015. Google's asteroid mining company, Planetary Resources, lobbied hard for this legislation, and they got it. Now there's a legal challenge because it's clearly violating the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which states that space is not subject to claims of sovereignty.
Right.
So that's the sorry state of affairs currently. But let's look at where the space program went black and became a covert venture. Now, you always reference this period of 1947 when the National Security Act created a new system of secret power and secret finance. And the first real challenge to that system is the Kennedy administration. When he's eliminated, it becomes business as usual again, and they go right back into the secrecy.
Well, I don't know if you saw that statistic that right after he died, the NASA budget peaked at 4.5% of the budget to 0.5%.
Wow, that's a huge reduction.
That's huge. So, and I don't think it really dropped. I just think it went dark.
Huh. Yeah, you'd think it would expand like every other program.
Right. Now, I think part of killing Kennedy was saying, okay, we're going to take this whole activity and take it dark.
Right.
Because remember, in the early 60s, we all believed that we would have colonies on Mars by, we just thought, okay, we're off to the races and we're going to space. And this is going to be a very big part of our lives. It was a major thing. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. And we're like, what happened?
Well, it was the new frontier. JFK and the space program. Star Trek started in the 60s also. The culture was full of space ideas and concepts. We had the moon landing in 1969. And then a few years later, the whole program basically goes defunct. There's no more national idealism calling us into space. It's over.
Right.
So the real space program goes black budget, and we developed Star Wars technology, which, as we said, was a kind of militarization of space, a very different ideal from the Discovery ideal that we started with. And of course, JFK's idea was not a space race. He wanted a joint mission with the Soviets and others to the moon and saw it as a way to bring nations together. So Star Wars, ostensibly, was basically, hey, we can blast your nukes from space. So that's a very different tone there.
I think we wrote a very significant special report this year on space law.
Uh-huh.
because we wanted to understand what was the history of, what was the governance structure legally related to space, what were the treaties, what were the issues, and where were we? Because if we're going to go into space in a big way, then we've got to have a legal framework. And first, it's set by treaty with countries around the world. And what we discovered is that there is this enormous challenge because you have country after country starting space programs, throwing up satellites. We now have the Russians and Chinese planning, bases on the far side of the moon, et cetera, et cetera. So an explosion of activity and a real traffic jam in the orbital platform. And so all these issues that need to be addressed, and yet the space treaties are not evolving to handle it. And I believe that the logical reason, though I can't, this is just intuition, is that the US has very significant space weapons. And since that's illegal, according to the treaties, nobody wants to say anything. So we're just pretending, we refuse to sign any new treaties because we don't want to have to lie, but we don't want to do any new treaties because we've got them. And my guess is whatever we've got, it's critical to the preservation of the US dollar's reserve currency. So it's a very uncomfortable position because if you look at the crowding in the orbital platform and the activities that just the Chinese and Russians have announced, there's going to be more than a little bit of tension. Now, one question I have is to what extent will drones relieve some of the pressure on the satellite systems, because they're planning on doing a lot of stuff through the drones, that can be within the atmosphere.
Fascinating. So what would I expect to find in the orbital and suborbital platforms up there? GPS satellites, for example.
Right. So you're just looking at in the suborbital, you're going to be looking at space tourism and some satellites. In the orbital, you're going to be looking at, the much higher function satellites are going to be higher up. So it's simply the layers of activities. And what's interesting is I don't know how they define the space that drones are going in. Mm-hmm. So part of it is lower than the suborbital platform. I don't know if it includes the suborbital platform or not.
Right. Now, do you think this is a way to make drones seem very, friendly, like Friendly Skies drones, which they have a very bad reputation right now for really being anti-privacy, for example?
Yeah, drones have really been developed initially for military application. The reality is, if you look at the savings generated potentially by drone technology, it's enormous. So whether it's, basically Earth observation or internet communications or, all sorts of functions like delivery, it's clearly a technology that can generate enormous amounts of productivity. Mm-hmm. and make things far more economic. So the challenge is it's going to have very positive and very negative applications. And given that you have a telecommunications and software and intelligence agency infrastructure that has zero respect for human privacy, that we can see just from observing their behavior, that you're contributing to the invasiveness of the whole system. And unfortunately, Daniel, part of the problem is that so far in history, two of the most profitable endeavors in the world are warfare and slavery. And unfortunately, this technology encourages a lot of people to engage in those kinds of activities because it's very, very profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. And now they have completely unstoppable technology to help them engage in these kinds of activities in the most destructive way ever.
Right. So now we have free-range slavery.
Free-range slavery. That does not sound healthy.
Right. Well, one of the reasons that I went back, concerned about the technology, I went back last year and did a very detailed study of the economics of American slavery. And there's a new book out by a professor at Cornell that's very helpful in doing it. And one of the reasons that slavery was canceled, that it was outlawed, was the city of London kept getting burnt because the lending would be collateralized. by slaves, and then they couldn't perfect a lien. They had, what would happen is they would lend money on a whole bunch of slaves in Mississippi, and then the borrowers get in trouble, and then they just move the slaves out to Texas and sell, or someplace else and sell them. Okay, and they could never prove that Harry Smith was really their collateral, and it'd be too expensive to go prove it.
Right.
So the lenders kept getting burnt, but digital technology gives you a way to perfect the lien.
Wow, that's so interesting. Now they can do it.
That's very dangerous change from 200 years ago. I'll tell you a very interesting statistic. When I was working on the study, one of the things I discovered was that the slaves had built up in America on the East Coast, and then an effort was made to create corporations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and then have a mass migration of slaves over to these new corporations to build out the cotton, the cotton juggernaut, which was really absolutely critical to building up the capital of the United States and putting the United States really in the economic sort of winner game globally. Anyway, so they stipulated that 70% of the slaves who were migrated had to be young single men between the ages of 19 and 36. Mm-hmm. And just as I was reading that section and taking notes, I was doing a commentary on the immigration into Europe, and I went to the EU website to get some statistics, and they described the fact that 70% of the migrants into Europe last year were single men between the ages of 19 and 36. Oh. I said, some things never change,
Yeah, absolutely.
This is old, right? This is an old design.
So now, because of the digital technology tracking, slavery is a viable option for these powerful elites. So they want it, and they want it back in style.
Well, one of my biggest concerns, if you look at the reports of immigration over the last 3 years into the United States, we've had tremendous waves of young people who arrive at the border. According to the retired border guards, they come to the border and they're fresh, they've come 1,000 miles, they have money, and it's a very different kind of refugee coming across. And then if you look at how many that they are estimated are coming across, then they kind of disappear and nobody can. And one of my questions is, are they going into the underground bases? Is this labor for the underground bases?
Well, let's get into the underground bases for a moment. Now, there's obviously vast secret infrastructure down there, and we've been fortunate enough to have a few whistleblowers tell us about it over the years, and some that got silenced very quickly. My question is, what do you think they're being used for?
I think that potentially it's several things. If you're the government, you want to make sure you're fine in the worst case. You always have worst case. You always have a plan for the worst case to make sure the government is enduring. You also want to have places where you can do lots of things that you don't want the general population or other countries knowing about. So both secret facilities, secret research, all sorts of secret stuff. So, but then you also want to have facilities in case anything goes on above ground that's going to put people at risk. So you end up, because you have the technology, building, secret underground railroads, building underground facilities, and probably doing it all over the world is my guess. Mm-hmm. And certainly under the ocean. If you look at sort of the behavior of the mining stocks over the last 50 years, I suspect, and some of the offshore drilling, I suspect they're not mining, gold and silver and base metals. They're mining underground facilities. So I think the underground facilities are probably pretty significant in terms of the amount of money that's gone into them.
How do you think they affect the above-ground society, aside from the stock aspects?
I really believe at some subconscious level there are no secrets. And so I think that, the general population feels left behind. Mm-hmm. And it feels left behind because huge amounts of money are being invested in things which are invisible, but somehow I think people know. It's always interesting when you talk to the truckers. Yeah. Because the truckers, they're trucking the stuff into the underground bases or to the mountain or into another truck, so people know the word gets around quietly, and I think they feel they've left behind. It's interesting. In the '90s, I was driving around the country a lot, and I'd always come into like a Super 8 or Super 6 motel at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm looking for a room, and there's somebody behind the counter, and they're reading the Left Behind series.
Yes.
And there was really this feeling in the '90s with globalization and all this kind of covert investment that we'd been left behind. And so I think really at some level people knew.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of, on one hand they know, but on the other hand they don't want to know because it's too, there's nothing productive to be gained. It's like when they asked me if I wanted to meet aliens, I was like, not today. No.
And that was a real offer from a Navy think tank that asked you, seriously, do you want to meet some aliens?
Right. So I think they think there's no, but it put a kind of sadness and depression on the whole society. That's what I think.
Right. It's no longer operating as a whole culture. It's split off, and a small group is operating with a great advantage. Now, you've mentioned the presence of a kind of invisible hand shaping events in our day-to-day lives, and how average people get very frustrated. And it's because they know something is harvesting them, but they can't see what it is.
Right, they can't see it.
Now, what does that do to someone?
Well, first of all, it causes them to kind of slow down, because if you're being harvested, in a way, you kind of give up. So if you look at one of the things causing the problems in the economy, we're in a very powerful deflation. And part of it is people have decided, the hamsters decided not to keep the wheel spinning, so to speak. So part of it is you give up. The other is you get very careful about risks. You shrink your scope, who you deal with, how you deal with. So I think it's profoundly deflationary and profoundly demoralizing to people. Now, there are different coping mechanisms. Some people pretend it's really not happening. Other people get very angry. Some people like me, I'm always trying to unpack it because I figure I can outwit anything.
So far, so good, too, I would say.
Well, but it's a big, I told you from my operation, it's a big expense.
Yeah.
So, it's very, very expensive to tell the truth because we're dealing with corporate media who finds that bad for their business. So you're playing, you're competing with somebody who doesn't compete clean. They compete with dirty tricks. And so you have to deal with a lot of dirty tricks. And it's expensive. And now, on one hand, it was really funny. I just published an article. There was, if you look at what was going on in the '90s in Washington, Daniel, it was so much worse in many respects than what the Nazis were doing. It was the same thing. That they were rounding up innocent people and putting them into slave labor camps where they worked for the military. And they were essentially stealing their real estate in the process. So, and they were using government money to do it. So it was very Nazi-esque.
Right.
And of course, it was the Clinton administration in the lead on doing all of it. And it was not only bipartisan, it was biracial. I mean, this is where Eric Holder made his bones, rounding up innocent black teenagers and stuffing them into prison. So you had this really unbelievably dirty, ugly game on. And of course, now Clinton's running for president and trying to get all the African-American vote. So I got Bernie Sanders did a really aggressive ad on why, if you're African-American, you should vote for Bernie. So I thought, well, this is going to get interesting because if you look at Clinton's real record, it makes Adolf Hitler, look like a Democrat progressive. So I said, okay, I'm going to say something. And right before I hit the button, I said, this is probably going to cost me $2,000 to $5,000. And I said, now, is it worth it? And I said, you bet. And I hit the button, and sure enough, it wasn't about, it probably cost me about $1,000. We're working on a new website we'll launch. That got hacked. We had all sorts of phone problems. We had all sorts of mail problems. It was about $1,000 of overhead. And when you hiccup a whole team of people, it sort of knocks you lose a day or two. So
Oh, right. And this is the great unspoken truth about challenging these media forces at the core. It will cost you time and money if you're contradicting their version of reality. We've seen it again and again.
It's so amazing. The divergence between the official reality and reality has never been greater than it is today. And that's why I told you I always have this expression, it just keeps getting weirder.
Right, no question about it. What are the dangers inherent in the space economy?
Well, I think the danger in the space economy, I think the biggest danger, we had a miracle in the 1770s. The Constitution, in my mind, was one of the most miraculous things in the human history. And the Scottish Enlightenment and the values that came out of the Scottish Enlightenment were miraculous. And basically what they said is our authority comes to us by divine creation. And we are individually sacred, and human life is sacred. And we each have a right to freedom, to liberty, to happiness. And that comes to us by divine authority. And we have the right to create and take down governments. So the respect for individual rights and property rights in combination was an extraordinary covenant. And one of my favorite lines from the period is John Adams said, the revolution was the war was the consequence of the revolution. The revolution was in the hearts and the minds of the people and their commitment to a responsibility and obligation to each other. And so we created a covenant that has been, that has really been shared by the broad group of American people. And we've watched an enormous effort in divide and conquer to tear down and persuade people in their spirits and their minds and their beliefs to stop believing in that covenant. If you look at the presidential campaign, there's a lot of effort being made to get people to take positions that destroy that covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I think that is one of the most important things that we can do right now is to refresh, rejuvenate that covenant. Because it's very powerful. I don't know if you realize this, but essentially the guy who architected the Constitution was Alexander Hamilton. And my firm in Washington was named Hamilton Securities after Alexander Hamilton.
Oh, yeah. And he appears on a lot of Solari material.
Alexander is a big hero of mine. And it was really because when I worked in the Bush administration, I worked for a group of people who kept trying to cancel and abrogate contracts in very illegal ways. And we had a general counsel who used to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if it's illegal. By the time they went in court, we'll be gone. So just do it. So you couldn't get any help from the lawyers because they didn't believe in the law. So it felt to me to have to argue on behalf of not abrogating our contracts and not breaking the law. It was very funny to try and explain to high-level government officials that we are supposed to uphold and enforce the law, not tear it apart. Anyway, and so I used to have a deputy who always say, don't worry, Alexander Hamilton had the same fight and he always won. It was just painful. But, so we started to joke that I was
you're the spirit of Alexander Hamilton. Well, it is intriguing to contemplate what some of the founding figures of America would say about this, absurd elite system of secrecy that we have now, because they knew how dangerous that level of secrecy can be.
I think one of the big questions that the space-based economy, or one of the divisions that it's caused this real split between those in the know and those not in the know, and that divergence, that secrecy, is creating privileges. Privileges, Daniel, are the most wasteful thing you can have in an economy. We should talk more about it because they can literally destroy so much optimization within an economy that they shrink the wealth of the people with the privileges.
Really?
I mean, so it can be that destructive.
It works against everyone.
Right. We've created this divergency of who's in the know that has created enormous privileges for the people in the know It's divided the population, and that is threatening this covenant. And we cannot afford to lose that covenant, because then we are talking about slavery and genocide and, all those other things that we've seen symptoms of, but we haven't seen sort of the big,
Right.
The big push. And to stop that push, we need to reaffirm the covenant. And we can't do that without bringing transparency to this divergence and healing the divergence. And a lot of what, my work is about is trying to, whether it's transparency or taking steps to close the divergence, to do that. Because I think it's going to be very unhealthy for all parts of the society, not just the folks being left behind. I think it's going to be very unhealthy. If you look at what's going on in the people in the know, I mean, the reason I'm over here with everybody else is, if I have a choice, it's healthier over here than over there.
Oh, big time.
So I think everybody needs this kind of healing.
Absolutely. And it's important to understand what all of this effort is for. Now, you say in the space wrap-up that secrecy equals unipolar dominance for us. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think one of the reasons that we went with secrecy was so the United States could assert unipolar dominance and not have to share power. If you look at what Kennedy was doing with the Russians, he was basically putting forward a multipolar model and a collaborative model. And I think that, part of the decision to assassinate Kennedy and take the space program black was to help assert a global unipolar model with the United States, clearly building the empire moving out from the center of the United States.
I can see that, and there's a real spirit of JFK in this report. It shows up in a few different places, which I find intriguing. There's a cartoon you have in there where the presidential motorcade is going through Dealey Plaza, and the sign says, "The End of Innocence."
Right.
And what were you thinking of there?
Here's what I always think of when I think of Kennedy. That was a period when we as a society, or let me step back. Richard Eberhard has a great line in one of his poems where he says, "Violent, vivid, and of infinite possibility." That was a time in our history when we really felt that we could do anything. Possibilities were infinite. We were going to travel to the stars. We were going to end poverty. We were going to make things work. We were going to bring peace to this world. It was really a period of, it was Camelot. They called it Camelot for a reason, because it felt like Camelot.
Uh-huh.
And during my lifetime, there have been different periods when we started to go into Camelot, and then wham.
Oh, yeah.
Global decides to restore the balance. You notice if you look at who's getting assassinated, for the most part, it's the really charismatic,
Definitely.
It's the most attractive, they don't kill the ugly ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
it's the real competitors to the throne that they want.
It's people who can amass and gather and use power through real, authentic methods,
Right.
And so they cause the machine, machine prefers machine candidates.
Exactly.
So we kill the charismatic and keep the drones, so to speak. So
right. So the LBJs and the Alan Dulles types, they get by fine.
Right. So anyway, but I think I think that the Kennedy years was a feeling of real Camelot, of a period of real confidence in the human race and in ourselves, but in our species. And what I like to do is I like to bring that feeling back every time I can.
I see.
Because I believe the way to have a great future is to visualize one. And I want to keep reminding people that that is possible. And there's certainly no economic reasons why it can't be. So I always keep trying to bring that Camelot feeling back.
Well, we can certainly use some of that Camelot vision now. And when we come back, we'll see just what a wrong turn we took in turning our future over to the national security state, and really get into what the advanced technology is that they're hiding. Where did it come from? Come back for our final round of Part 1 with Catherine Austin Fitts. We'll be back.
Go deeper with Dark Journalist. Subscribe now and you'll have access to the complete audio archives to download or stream at your convenience. Receive advanced updates and discounts on Dark Journalist events. Enjoy exclusive subscriber-only content. Go deeper with Dark Journalist. Visit darkjournalist.com and subscribe now for a special winter discount, available for just $39 for 1 full year. Dark Journalist, the truth is never easy.
Sitting there filming, a little saucer came from, I say little saucer, it was a saucer, came flying over their heads, put down 3 little landing gear and landed right out on the dry lake bed. And they picked up their cameras and started over toward it, filming as they went. And when they got in fairly close to it, it lifted up, put the gear back in the wheel wells, tipped up, and took off at a great rate of speed.
Dark Journalist will go there.
Has our public effort with regards to space been transferred to private hands with the help of the Black Budget and the deep state?
Hidden technology.
In other words, the possibility exists that you have here a machine that is manipulating magnetic fields on a planetary scale that has nothing to do with particle physics.
The Black Budget.
But there's no such thing as getting away from the corruption, because it is literally, it is now integrated into every economy in the globe.
Geoengineering.
I'm talking about right down to the DNA level. Imagine that you have now put microprocessors and sensors, along with everything else, into every human body, every animal body.
For more interviews, special reports, and documentaries, visit darkjournalist.com today. Dark Journalist. The truth is never easy.
And we are back. This is Dark Journalist, and I'm here with former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts. Catherine has just released a powerful report on the space economy, tracking global investment heading to the stars. And one thing you'll find in this report is that she's not playing it safe. On one hand, this is a great business analysis of opportunities in space. But on the other, it's a wake-up call that all is not as it seems. We have a UFO issue, an advanced technology, and a black budget issue. And if we had real campaigns in America today, this is what we'd be talking about. But we can open our eyes right here on this show. Now, Catherine, we were discussing Camelot and the idealism of that period, which launched the space program and JFK's vision for a new world. Now, had he lived through those 8 years of his presidency instead of being cut down and assassinated before 3 years were up, we'd be living in a totally different world, especially in regards to space.
Unbelievably, and can I tell you, it would have been a much wealthier world. Mm-hmm. Much wealthier economically. So Kennedy was a believer in freedom, and the globalization would have proceeded, more steadily throughout the period. We'd be in a very different place.
Yeah.
So the U.S. would not be as powerful relatively. The U.S. would probably be wealthier, but it would be less powerful.
I can appreciate that. So parts of the change in that period that echo through to today is, instead of going for a kind of family of nations, progressing towards the stars together, Mr. Global's imperative mission seems to be more along the lines of destroying rivals and controlling the everyday reality we live in.
Whatever happened, the result was to keep whatever we're doing in space much darker, keep it much more controlled, and to keep the U.S. much more powerful in the mix. So did the U.S. faction kill Kennedy, or was it Mr. Global?
Yeah, excellent point. It's such a crucial change with historical impact on the world and space. We really were at a crossroads and took a very wrong turn, and that has us now in this dual reality. But when you look at some of the kind of 50-odd years since JFK and how the space program developed mostly into Star Wars and weaponization of space, because our program with NASA, as you say in the report, is almost defunct and certainly defunded, basically making the public space program irrelevant. So where are we now? Because even in your wrap-up, you show all of this money moving into space. You mentioned satellites are a $200 billion industry. So space is where it's at.
Right, but I'll tell you where the growth is. If you look at global space programs, China has more people working in their overt space programs than we do. So we have 250,000, they have 300,000 overtly. Russia has 250,000. In some respects, Russia's a real leader in space. And I think that's a lot of where the tensions developed, because you notice the real tensions in Russia started as soon as they got their GPS global satellites up. And they were the second. I don't know if you noticed that in the annual wrap-up, but I talk a lot about, I think a lot of the tensions between the US and Russia come from Russia's role in space and their competition with us as an export, not just of arms, but of space-related launches and other space products.
They've always been very advanced in space.
And in technology. They're always, and that's why I think China and Russia saying, okay, we're going to create independent satellite systems, we're going to create independent clearance and payment systems to the extent that they're doing that, that's very big. But if you step back, the Asian countries, it's not just China, so Korea, different, sort of India has a big one. So if you look at the capacity that's being added globally to space and space activities, it's very, very significant. And it was interesting. I don't know if you saw The Martian yet.
Yes.
The Martian, of course, came out the day that NASA announces they found water on Mars, which, of course, drove the box office receipts up. And, it was very, when it happened, I said, how did Murdoch get NASA to do that?
Unbelievable, yeah. It's incredible.
Correct. Anyway, but in The Martian, you see the Chinese cooperating and working with the Americans to get Matt Damon back. And I thought it was a very interesting signal of how big and important their space program is. Remember, they have 50,000 more people in their space program, at least overtly, than we do. So, I think at the Mr. Global level, Mr. Global is looking to create massive global capacity in space. And that's going to be a multipolar effort, not a unipolar effort.
Recently North Korea fired a satellite into space, and it even took pictures of the Super Bowl, actually. And since then, we've been hearing about them arming nukes. Now, do you think there's anything to North Korea as a space threat?
I don't know. North Korea is a funny situation because my guess is Michelle Chadodowski at Global Research has a very good book on sort of describing all the things we've done to North Korea and that they've withstood. So it's an interesting kind of standoff. The funny thing is China has a very delicate problem with North Korea. And that is, I just did an interview with a wonderful professor from Tufts named Kelly Greenhill this week it's on mass migration. If China gives North Korea too hard a problem, North Korea just sends, hundreds of thousands of people across the border for the to feed. And so China really, so here you have this big, powerful China, but they're really always under threat of migration from North Korea. And so they have to be very careful about what they do to North Korea.
Absolutely.
It's kind of a funny situation. My guess is North Korea does not have sufficient capacity to really cause the United States any problem. They do have sufficient capacity to make Japan and other allies nervous. And we can't afford, whether it's vis-a-vis China and South China Sea or North Korea with their satellites or rockets, to not remain the hegemon, or the unipolar guys cannot afford to not be the hegemon in Asia. And the question is, how do they handle North Korea? So I don't think it's a big problem, but it's a problem. It's one of hundreds of problems we face in moving to a multipolar world, where, given how we got to the multipolar world, you have a lot of divisiveness, troublemaking, and a lot of populations trying to grab as much food as they can, whether it's in the ocean or it's farmland like the Ukraine, as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So the competition over resources, particularly food and water, is just going up, and it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
Fascinating. Well, the global debasement is still sinking in.
Right.
Let's talk about secrecy for a moment. Why this heavy secrecy in space? You do a lot in this report going into this, and I have to say here that I think everyone needs a copy of this report because there are so many answers in here. But let's get an overview on this from you. What is it that's up there in space that demands this level of secrecy and disinformation? From all your research, what is it that could be going on that they would want this level of secrecy?
There's two problems. One is, let's say in 1947, there was a truth that needed to be told, and a decision was made not to tell it. And I'm sure we've learned more than then, but let's just call it, the truth of whatever is going on.
Okay.
We decided to not tell it, and we've expended an enormous amount of resources keeping it hushed up that have done a lot of damage to a lot of people and a lot of things over the last 50, 60 years. So there's the decision, there's the truth, whatever it is, and then there's the cover-up. And now the problem is, whatever the truth is, how do you explain away the cover-up, and how do you explain away all the privileges that a whole group of people have gotten as a result of the cover-up?
Mm-hmm.
So you've taken an enormous amount of money out of the American people's pockets and illegally moved it into operations and taken all the technology and transferred it to all these companies. If you should mention that this has all really gone on, everybody's like, well, where's my shares of Intel? I should get some shares of Intel, right?
Yeah.
Or I should get some shares of Google, or whatever. And so you're going to have, you're basically going to cause an entire look at your authenticity, your credibility. I mean, in one sense, you're going to destroy the credibility of most of the current government and its leadership.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So most leadership don't embrace committing suicide.
Uh-huh.
If you
right, okay.
So I think part of the problem you have is the cover-up. The second problem you have is, what is the truth? And are you better off with people knowing the truth or not? And I don't know, because I don't know what the truth is.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I've reached the belief that the cover-up is so expensive and dysfunctional. My attitude is, bring the truth on. If you want depopulation, fine. Bring the truth on and scare everybody to death, and then the fearless guys will live. So
that's your Winston Churchill approach. Tell the people.
Yeah, tell the people. Because I think the people can handle. I think the people can handle it better than they can handle the waste and dysfunction of the privilege. So I would tell the truth. Now, depending on what the truth is, that could be a very tricky period. I appreciate that. But I think we have to tell the truth. And my problem in arguing for that is I don't know what the truth is. So,
sure.
When I'm trying to figure out what it is, because I will tell you, the secrecy, Daniel, has reached a level of ridiculousness. We're watching in the United States a leadership that cannot deal with the divergence between reality and official reality.
Uh-huh.
They cannot deal with it. They've lost the ability to deal with it. And, and you have a very serious deterioration in things.
Well, I really agree that the situation is looking truly schizophrenic on the official side. So, Catherine, let's wind up this episode here. Really incredible. And let's go ahead and do part 2. And there we'll go deeper into the secrecy, the off-world civilizations, and hidden technology. So we'll sign off now. This is how we'll do it. This episode will air on Monday, March 7th. And part 2 for subscribers will go up on Monday, March 14th at darkjournalist.com. And this is the best time to subscribe there. And that really helps the show. Of course, all of Catherine's work can be found at solari.com. And Catherine, thanks so much for part 1. Really incredible and amazing work. And let's go ahead and go into part 2.
Well, I always appreciate doing these conversations. You know, the major reason why I do your show, Daniel, is that's how I get to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, it's the best way to catch up. Well, that's great. Let's talk some more. Thank you for joining me for this fascinating episode with former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts on the UFO Economy 3.0, the Black Budget rockets into space. You can find more special reports, interviews, and documentaries at www.darkjournalist.com. You can also subscribe here to our YouTube channel for the latest videos. See you soon.
Dark Journalist will go there. The deepest issues, the hardest stories, the biggest secrets. The truth is never easy. With top guests, like former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts.
Catherine, who is really behind this media censorship?
Internet feeds go through satellites. Who controls the satellites? It's the Pentagon.
Legendary investigator Graham Hancock.
Graham, this cataclysm must have destroyed an advanced culture in our ancient past.
It truly was an extinction-level event. It was accompanied by massive animal extinctions. It was accompanied by huge and unexplained sea level rises, and then a sudden plunge of global temperatures.
Best-selling author Jim Marrs.
Jim, don't these elite corporate owners need us around to buy their GMO food? Why would they want to depopulate?
Because they are eugenicists and they believe that they need to purify the human race. And if that sounds like the Nazis, that's exactly what it is.
Coast to Coast AM investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe.
Linda, how are we going to scale that wall of UFO secrecy?
Humans themselves are bypassing, are beginning to dismiss all of the policies of denial and lies.
Dark Journalist will go there. Visit darkjournalist.com and subscribe now for a special winter discount available for just $39 for 1 full year. You'll not only receive access to the complete audio archives to stream or download at your convenience, you'll also get exclusive subscriber-only content and Dark Journalist event discounts. Sign up for our free newsletter to stay updated on the latest shows. Dark Journalist. Let's get the real story in 2016.
You know, we need dark journalists, so just keep doing what you're doing.